Section 61 of the Endeavour Journal of Sir Joseph Banks, Journal from 25 August, 1768 to 12 July, 1771 by Joseph Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Section 61. Some account of the Cape of Good Hope. Notwithstanding, hydrographers limit the Cape of Good Hope to a single point of land on the southwest end of Africa, which is not the southward part of that immense continent. I shall, under that name, speak of the southern parts of Africa in general, as far as latitude 30 at least, which country was originally inhabited by the Hottentots alone, but is now settled by the Dutch, and from its conveniency of situation as a place of refreshment for ships sailing to and from India, is visited perhaps by Europeans oftener than any other distant part of the globe. This tract of land, vast as it is settled by the Dutch, who have also people much farther inland, if their counts can be credited. They have upon the whole of it, however, only one town, which is generally known by the name of Cape Town. It is situated on the Atlantic side, about 20 miles to the northward of the real Cape, on the banks of a bay, sheltered from the southeast wind by a large mountain, level at the top, from whence both itself and the bay have got the name of Tafel or Table. It is of late years very much increased in size, and consists of about 1,000 houses, neatly built of brick and in general whitened over. The streets in general are broad and commodious, all crossing each other at right angles. In the chief of them is a canal, on each side of which is a row of oak trees, which flourish tolerably well and yield an agreeable shade to walkers. Besides this, there is another canal running through the town, but the slope of the ground is so great that both were obliged to be furnished with sluices at the intervals of little more than 50 yards. In the houses, the same poverty of inventions exists here as at Batavia. They are almost universally built upon one and the same plan, whether small or large. In general they are low, and universally they are covered with thatch, precautions said to be necessary against the violence of the southeast winds, which at some seasons of the year come down from the Table Mountain with incredible violence. Of the inhabitants, a far larger proportion are real Dutch than of those of Batavia. But as the whole town in a manner is supported by entertaining and supplying strangers, each man in some degree imitates the manners and customs of the nation with which he is chiefly concerned. The ladies, however, do not follow their husbands in this particular, but so true are they to the customs of fatherland that scarce one of them will stir without a souterkind or chauffette ready to place under her feet whenever she shall set down. The younger ones, though, in general, do not put any fire in them, but seem to use them merely for show. In general, they are handsome, with clear skins and high complexions, and when married, no reflections upon my countrywomen, are the best housekeepers imaginable, and great child-bearers. Had I been inclined for a wife, I think this is the place of all others I have seen where I could have best suited myself. Their servants are in general Malay slaves, who are brought here from Batavia. To these they behave much better than the Batavians, in consequence of which these Malays are much quieter, honester, more diligent, and less wicked than those in that place, in instance of which I need only say that there was never known an instance of running amok in this place. The town is governed by a governor and council, who are quite independent of Batavia. The present governor is Rick Tolbach. He is very old and has long enjoyed his present station with a most universal good character, which is easily explained in this manner. He is unmarried and has no connections, which may make him wish to make more money than his salary furnishes him with. Consequently, not entering into trade, he interferes with no man, and not wishing to be bribed, does always, to the best of his abilities, strict justice on all occasions. The climate, though not at all too hot for those who come from India, would doubtless appear sufficiently warm, could anyone be transported immediately from England to this place. Upon the whole, it seems much of the same temperature as the island of Madeira, though scarce quite so hot. This I judge from the productions in general. During the whole summer the air is frequently fanned by southeast winds, which come off the hills above the town with vast violence, and during the time of their blowing, especially at the beginning, are very troublesome to such as are obliged to be abroad in them, by raising the sand with which the whole country abounds, and filling their eyes with it. Nor are the houses quite free from its effects, however close they are shut up. The sand will find an entrance, and in a short time cover every kind of furniture with a thick dust. Inconvenient as this certainly is, it however does not seem to have any effect beyond the present moment, though the inhabitants must in the course of a summer inspire an immense quantity of this sand, which has been thought by some physicians to be productive of ulcers in the lungs, etc., etc. Yet consumptions are diseases scarcely known here, and the healthy countenances, fresh complexions, and above all the number of children with which all ranks of people here are blessed, abundantly prove that the climate in general is very friendly to the human constitution. Diseases brought here from Europe are said to be almost immediately cured, but those of the Indies not so easily, which latter we ourselves experienced, our sick recovering very little for the first fortnight, and after that very slowly, so that after a month's stay several of them were far from recruited. The industry of the Dutch, so well known, and so constantly exerted in all foreign settlements, has supplied this place with a profusion of all kinds of European provisions. Wheat and barley is here as good as in Europe. Hops, however, will not grow here, so beer they cannot make even tolerable. Cattle are in great plenty, and beef very tolerable. Sheep likewise in great plenty. Both these the native Hottentots had before the Dutch settled the place, so they both differ a little in appearance from those of other places. The oxen are lighter and more neatly made, and have vast spreading horns. The sheep, instead of wool, are covered with a kind of substance between hair and wool. Their tails are also very large. I have seen such as could not weigh less than 10 or 12 pounds, and was told that they are often much larger. Of the milk of their cows they make very good butter, but cheese they know not how to make in any degree of perfection. Besides these they have goats in plenty, which however they never eat, and hogs, but these are less plentiful. Poultry, as fowls, ducks, geese, etc., are in tolerable plenty. Besides they have wild game, as hares, exactly like ours in Europe, partridges of 2 kinds, quails, antelopes of many kinds, bustards in general very well flavoured, but rather drier than those of the same kinds in Europe. As their fields produce European wheat and barley, so their gardens produce the same kinds of vegetables as we have in Europe. Cabbages, turnips, potatoes, asparagus, broccoli, etc., etc., are all plentiful and excellent in their kinds. Their fruits are also the same: apples, pears, oranges, peaches, apricots, and figs, etc. Of Indian fruits they have plantains, guavas, and jambu, but neither of these in any kind of perfection. Besides these, their vineyards produce a great quantity of wine, which they range into many sorts, calling one Madeira, another Frontenac, etc. None of these are comparable to the wines which we commonly drink in Europe, yet they are all light, well cured, and far from unpalatable in taste, not unlike some of the light French and Portuguese white wines. The famous Constantia, so well known in Europe, is made genuine only at one vineyard, which is about 10 miles distant from the Cape Town. Near that, however, is another vineyard, which likewise is called Constantia, where a wine not much inferior to it is made, which is always to be had at an inferior price. The common method of living is to lodge and board with some one of the inhabitants, many of whose houses are always open for the reception of strangers. The prices are 5, 4, 3, or 2 shillings a day, for which all necessaries are found you, according as your situation leads you to choose a more or less expensive method of living, in what may truly be called a profusion in proportion to the price you give. Besides this, there is hardly an expense in the place. Coaches are seldom or never used, but may be hired at the rate of 6 rix, or 11b4s, a day. Horses are at 6s a day, but the country is not tempting enough to induce anyone often to make use of them. Public entertainments there are none, nor were there any private ones, owing to the measles, which broke out about the time of our arrival. At other times I was told that there were, and that strangers were always welcome to them, if of any rank. At the farther end of the High Street is the Company's Garden, which is near 2/3 of an English mile in length. The whole is divided by walks, intersecting each other at right angles, planted with oaks, which are clipped into wall hedges, except in the centre walk, where they are suffered to grow to their size. This walk, therefore, at all times of the day, furnishes an agreeable shade, no doubt highly beneficial to the sick, as the country is not furnished with the least degree of shade, nor has nature given one tree to the soil capable of producing it, at least within several miles round the town. Infinitely The largest part of this garden is employed in producing cabbages, carrots, etc. 2 small squares, however, are set apart for botanical plants, which are well taken care of and neatly kept. At the time we were there, the greatest part of the plants, as the annuals, bulbs, etc., were under the ground. Upon the whole, however, I am of opinion that the numbers now to be found there will not amount to above half of what they were when Oldenland wrote his catalogue. Indeed, at this time it is possible that more ground was employed for the purpose. At the farther end of the garden is a vivarium or menagerie, supported also at the expense of the company, where rare beasts and birds are kept. Here were ostriches, cassowaries, antelopes of several kinds, zebras, and several other animals seldom or never seen in Europe, particularly that called by the Hottentots coidoe, whose beautiful spiral horns are often brought over to Europe. This animal, who was as large as a horse, died while we were there, but not before I had had time to get a description and drawing of him. Near this enclosure is another for birds, in which were the crowned pigeons of Banda, and several more rare birds, especially of the duck kind, of which were indeed a very fine collection. Both birds and beasts were very carefully and well taken care of. It remains now, after having described the town and its environs, to say a little of the country about it. Of this, indeed, I can say but little, and even for that little am obliged to depend entirely upon hearsay, not having had an opportunity of making even one excursion, owing in great measure to Dr. Solander's illness. The Dutch say that they have settled the country inland as far as 2,200 miles. At least, so far it is to the most distant habitations of Europeans. How far it may be, however, upon a straight line north and south, is hard to say, nor do they pretend to guess. Supposing it, however, the shortest distance possible, it is sufficient to prove the infinite and, indeed, to an European almost inconceivable barrenness of the country in general, that the mere supplies of food should make it necessary for men to spread themselves over such an immense tract of country, in order to find fertile spots capable of producing it. How far distant such spots are from each other may be concluded from what one farmer told us while there, on being asked why he brought his young children with him to the Cape, from whence he lived 15 days' journey, and told me that he had better have left them with his next neighbour. "Neighbour?" said he, "my nearest neighbour lives 5 days' journey from me." Nor does the country immediately in the neighbourhood of the Cape give any reason to contradict the idea of immense barrenness, which must be formed from what I have said. The country in general is either bare rock, shifting sand, or grounds covered with heath, etc., like the moors of Derbyshire, Yorkshire, etc., except the very banks of the few rivulets, where are a few plantations chiefly employed, if well sheltered, in raising garden stuff, and if rather less so, in vineyards. But if exposed, nothing can stand the violence of the winds which blow here through the whole summer or dry season. During my whole stay here, I did not see a tree in its native soil so tall as myself. Indeed, housekeepers complain of the dearness of firewood as almost equal to that of provisions, nothing being burnt here but roots which must be dug out of the ground. What indeed proves the influence of the wind in prejudice to vegetation is that a stem not thicker than my thumb will have a root as thick as my arm or leg, and thicker they never are. As their distant settlements are directly inland, and the whole coast either is or is thought to be totally destitute of harbours, their whole communication is carried on by land carriage. Waggons drawn by oxen are employed in that service. They are, however, very light, and the cattle so much more nimble than ours in Europe, that they assured us that they sometimes travelled at the rate of 8 miles an hour. Travelling is also very cheap, as there are no inns upon the road. Everyone must carry his own provision with him, and the oxen must live upon the heath or ling which they meet with upon the road, and indeed they are accustomed to do. But great as these conveniences are, the people who come from afar must do little more than live, as there is no trade here but for a few articles of provision which are sent to the East Indies, and curiosities. So they can bring nothing to market but a little butter, such skins of wild beasts as they have been able to procure, and some of them a few kinds of drugs. There remains nothing now but to say a word or two concerning the Hottentots, so frequently spoken of by travellers, by whom they are generally represented as the outcast of the human species, a race whose intellectual faculties are so little superior to those of beasts, that some have been inclined to suppose them more nearly related to baboons than men. Notwithstanding, I very much desired it. I was not able to see any of their habitations, there being none, as I was universally informed, within less than 4 days' journey from the Cape, in which they retained their original customs. Those who come to the Cape, which are in number not a few, are the servants of the Dutch farmers, whose cattle they take care of, and generally run before their waggons. These, no doubt, are the lowest and meanest of them, and those alone I can describe. These were in general slim in make, and rather lean than at all plump or fat, in size equal to Europeans, some as tall as 6 feet and more. Their eyes not expressive of any liveliness, but rather dull and unmeaning. The colour of their skins nearest to that of soot, owing in great measure to the dirt which by long use was ingrained into it, for I believe that they never wash themselves. Their hair curled in very fine rings, like that of negroes or of Persian lambskin, but hanging in falling ringlets, 7 or 8 inches long. Their clothes consisted of a skin, generally of a sheep, under which for decency's sake the men wore a small pouch, and the women a broad leather flap fastened round their waists by a belt, which in both sexes was richly ornamented with beads and small pieces of copper. Besides this, both sexes wore necklaces and sometimes bracelets, likewise of beads. And the women had round their legs certain rings made of leather, very hard, which they said served to defend them from the thorns with which the country everywhere abounds. Under their feet some wore a kind of sandal of wood or bark, but the greatest number went entirely unshod. For bodily qualifications they were strong and appeared nimble and active in a high degree. Their language, which appears to an European but indistinctly articulated, has this remarkable singularity, in that in the pronouncing a sentence they click or cluck with their tongues at very frequent intervals, so much so that these clicks do not seem to have any particular meaning, except possibly to divide words or certain combinations of words. How this can be effected unless they can click with their tongues, without inspiring their breath, appears mysterious to a European, and yet I am told that many of the Dutch farmers understand and speak their language very fluently. Almost all of them, however, speak Dutch, which they do without clicking their tongues, or any peculiarity whatsoever. In general they have more Volksheim, mauvais honte, than any people I have seen, which I have often had occasion to experience, when I have with the greatest difficulty persuaded them to dance or even to speak to each other in their own language in my presence. Their songs and dances are in extremes, some tolerably active, consisting of brisk music and quick motions, generally consisting of distortions of the body with unnatural leaps, crossing the legs backward and forward, etc., and then again as dull and spiritless as can be imagined, one of which consists entirely of beating the earth first with one foot and then with the other, without moving their place at all, to the cadences of a tune furnished with little more variety than the dance. Smoking is a custom most generally used among them, in doing which they do not, as the European, admit the smoke no farther than their mouths, but, like the Chinese, suck it into their lungs, where they keep it for near a minute before they expire it. They commonly mix with their tobacco the leaves of hemp, which they cultivate for that purpose, or Phlomis leonuris, which they call dacha. Their food is the same as that of the farmers, chiefly bread and coarse cheese, but they are immensely fond of spirituous liquors, and will never fail to get drunk with them if they have an opportunity. This little and no more of the customs of this much spoke of people had I an opportunity of seeing. From the Dutch indeed I heard much, of which I select the following. Within the boundaries of the Dutch settlements are many different nations of Hottentots, differing from each other in customs very materially. Of these some are far superior to others in arts in general. However, all live peaceably with each other, seldom fighting, except those who live to the eastward, who are much infested with people called by the Dutch Bushmen, who live entirely upon plunder, stealing the cattle of the Hottentots, but never openly attacking them. They are armed, however, with lances or assegais, arrows, which they know how to poison, some with the juice of herbs, other with the poison of the snake, called cobra de capello, and stones, which some particular tribes know so well how to throw that they will repeatedly strike a dollar or crown piece at the distance of 100 paces. Besides this, they train up bulls, which they constantly place round their kraals or towns. In the night these will constantly assemble, and oppose either man or beast that approaches them, nor will they desist till they hear the voices of their masters, who know how either to encourage them to fight, or in an instant make them as tame and tractable as their other cattle. Some nations know how to melt and prepare copper, which is found among them probably native, and make of it broad plates with which they ornament their foreheads. Others again, indeed most, know how to harden bits of iron, which they procure from the Dutch, and make of them knives of a temper superior to any the Dutch can sell them. Their chief people, many of whom have a large quantity of cattle of their own, are generally clad in the skins of lions, tigers, or zebras, etc., which they know how to fringe and ornament very prettily, especially the women, who, as in all other countries, are fond of dress. Both sexes grease themselves very frequently, but never use any stinking grease if they can possibly get either fresh mutton suet or sweet butter, which last, made by shaking the milk in a bag made of skin, is generally used by the richer sort. The ceremony of the priest giving his matrimonial benediction by a plentiful sprinkling of urine, often repeated, I heard confirmed. The Dutch, however, universally denied their having seen women whose legs were wrapped round with sheep's guts, which it has been supposed were to be a part of their food. Their monorchides, or semi-castration, was in general totally denied. Some, however, said that among the nation who knew how to melt copper were some who had undergone this ceremony, and that these were their best warriors, and the individual people who so well knew how to throw stones. In regard to the Sinus pudoris, that grand quarry of natural historians, many whom I asked, both Dutch and Malays, declared positively that it did not at all exist, and several of these assured me that they had, during intrigues with Hottentot women, had an opportunity of knowing which they had made use of. One, however, declared that something he had met with, but what it was he could not tell. And above all, a physician of the place declared that he had cured many hundred Hottentot women of venereal complaints, and that he never saw one without what he described to be fleshy, or rather skinny, appendages proceeding from the upper part of the labia, in appearance somewhat like cow's teats, but flat, which hung pendulous. These were very various in lengths, in some scarce half an inch, in others 3 or 4. That those, which were the only particularities he knew of in those women, he apprehended to be what authors called Sinus pudoris, though some have described it as a large skin equal to a garment for all purposes of decency, and others have thought it to be no more than an elongation of the clitoris in those women, which does not exist in those women at all more remarkable than in Europeans. A table of the value of money, supposing a stiver Dutch equal to a penny sterling, a guinea 18 shillings, half a dough 9 shillings, a crown piece 4 shillings, half of dough 2 shillings, a shilling 10 Dutch stivers, a French crown 4 shillings 6 Dutch stivers, a ducat 9 shillings, a ducatoon 6 shillings, a skilling 6 Dutch stivers, a double-chee 2 Dutch stivers, a stiver 1 Dutch stiver, an imperial riksdaler 4 shillings, Albert's dough 6 shillings, Dane's riksdaler 4 shillings, Spanish dollar 4 shillings 6 riksdalers, 6 Dutch stivers, a quarter of a dough 1 shilling. End of section 61. Some account of the Cape of Good Hope.